Welcome to this episode of the Human-Centered AI podcast with me, Alan Seid, and Matthias Rost. And with us today, we have Natali Helberger. Natali is a professor in law and digital technology with a special emphasis on AI at the University of Amsterdam. Natali, would you care to give us a short introduction of yourself?
Yes, of course. So, hi. Thanks a lot for inviting me. And I think it's a really important topics your podcast is about. And I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. As you already said, I'm a professor for law and digital technology with a special focus on AI here at the University of Amsterdam. I'm also one of the directors of the AI Media Democracy Lab, where we try with an interdisciplinary bunch of philosophers, lawyers, computer scientists, social scientists, and media organizations to try to figure out ways to not only talk about human-centric AI and responsible AI, but also do it actually and try to implement it into practice. And I'm leading a 10-year research program funded by the Dutch government on public values in the algorithmic society, which is very much about this question of not only human-centered AI, but what we really try with our research is to develop the alternative perspective, which is AI-centered humans and how our society is changing under the impact of AI. And what that means also for technology, but also for law, governance, values, and the way we all engage with something that has been really becoming part of our daily life.
Thank you. I also see that you're a PI of research priority area Humane AI. Would
Yeah.
you care to tell us what Humane AI is?
Yes. Humane AI, that is an initiative that we started here within the University of Amsterdam, because something that we noticed is that usually if you think about AI, you think of our colleagues at the computer science department. And they are amazing and they do great stuff on AI. But we also found out that there are a lot of people in the other faculties who also do AI from their different perspectives. So the computational scientists, they use AI as a research method. The philosophers think about values in AI. The lawyers are working on issues like the AI Act and governance of AI. So AI is actually so much present in all the faculties, and with the research priority at Humane AI, we really try to create a platform for all these different researchers to have a voice, to come together and meet each other. And the area runs for 5 years now. And we just heard that we'll be extended by the University of Amsterdam for another 5 years.
Congrats.
Thank you.
I find these interdisciplinary cooperations super interesting, but also when it comes to AI, which historically has been quite a technical subject, it's interesting to see how people from other disciplines come into this, the non-computer scientists. How did you start working in this field?
Good question. I think since the beginning of my career, I was always really interested in how technology transforms society and what that means for the law. Because what law does is law is trying to formulate values and lay down rules for society, for citizens in a society to live together in a peaceful and value-driven way. So law is really trying to shape the relationships in a society, and technology is more and more important also in shaping these relationships. So this relationship between law, technology, and citizens and society is really dynamic and really fascinating. And it's not a new thing in the sense before AI, we were talking about data-driven algorithms, big data was a term. Before that, we were actually trying to figure out how the internet would affect our society. So I think I'm really interested in this triangle between technology, society, and the law, and how this is evolving with ever more developing and smarter technologies and technologies that are ever more present in these relationships. And
So
then,
I'm super interested in like the timelines and perspectives going back in time because I mean now everyone is talking about AI. 5 years ago, fewer people talked about it. 10 years ago, even less. And I think you're talking about this now, you're interested in society and technology, and that's sort of what I'm interested in as well. And now it's more and more about AI, and where AI is kind of a technology, right? So could you perhaps talk a little bit about how in your world and in your work, how AI has kind of perhaps transformed or developed or changed, and how your perspective on it has changed?
Yeah, I think something that has changed a lot, especially since last year, is before that, a lot of people didn't even know that they interact on a daily basis with AI when they open up their phone. And there was experimentation with it, but it was very much reserved to specialists, nerds, experts, and so far. And what happened last year was really fascinating because suddenly the threshold for everybody to use a technology that is so powerful and volatile has lowered so much. So suddenly everybody had actually in their pocket very powerful AI technology. And I think this has changed the dynamics of adoption and the social dynamics in such a short time span. So something that took decades suddenly has happened in a year. And from a legal point of view, this is really interesting because it means that I think what's one of the biggest changes is the scale of things. And suddenly everybody was using a technology. So for the law, this creates really new questions because we will have to deal with unprecedented scales of adoption. It has become so much more difficult to anticipate opportunities, but also risks for society because everybody is using it in a very different way. So to some extent, the legal questions are not so much about the technology itself, but what happens if the technology is suddenly used by everybody in not only their private lives, but in their professional lives, because many of us are a private person who's using their phone, but at the same time, either an editor or an academic or someone working on the municipality or a courthouse or a company. And we all now use this technology, and that creates really interesting legal problems.
So I'm curious there because you mentioned that kind of we have for a long time been using AI. I mean, the devices have kind of built around some sort of machine learning or AI technology, and then in the last years, or let's say last year, we had this, chatbots where we kind of directly interact with an AI. So everyone knows that okay, now I am interacting with an AI because it's kind of talking seemingly, right? Whereas before, if I'm looking at my Facebook feed and it's curating my content using some sort of artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithms, I'm not really aware of that. Or if I'm recommended songs on Spotify or something like that. So I'm interested, like in terms of the legal perspective, how is it changing? Because you say that we've been using AI technology for a long time, but it's only in the last year that we are aware, or more people are aware
No,
that they're using it.
I
No?
think the big difference is that until now we were consumers. Most of us were consumers. I'm not sure what your background is. You probably computer science, right?
Sure.
So you really know how to use and build that stuff. Most of us people don't know that. So we were users, we were recipients of ever more smarter recommender systems, content moderation systems, personalized targeting, and so, but we were always at the receiving end. And now with the new wave of large language models and also new waves of making the technology accessible, we are all not simply consumers, but we're active users. We use it in our daily life for whatever we do in our private and professional life. And that makes a big difference because now the whole value chain has changed a lot. So it's not only the developer of the technology, and before the world were a bit easier because there was this developer of the technology, and the developer would make sure that the technology is safe and lives up to certain values and so far, and they would understand it. But now the value chain has become so much more complicated with so many more actors. So the whole question of what are the different roles of the actors, the different responsibilities, what are the fundamental rights, what are the public values that each of us have in their head, what are our ethical codes? These questions become so much more pertinent and make the environment so much more complex, but also so much more interesting.
It makes
That
me think about back 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe before that, but like the notion of prosumers came into the fore, where we
yeah,
used to be just consumers, and then all of a sudden we could use our devices to, record videos and put it on YouTube or whatever. We became prosumers, where we could just produce and consume, and it
yeah.
became a different thing. And here we have kind of what you're alluring to here is a sort of be becoming this with and of AI technology in a way.
We become active agents, yes. Developers, fine tuners. We produce not only content, but we can do so many more things with that. It's really interesting.
With this change, how difficult is it for law to keep up? If we think of traditional technologies, the research development, these things take time. Now we're in a stage where we have paradigm shifts every 2 months, more or less. How difficult is it for law to keep up?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's of course always an old criticism of the law, right? That the law is lagging behind technology and so far. I think we really need to do some debunking here. When good laws are not outdated with each new technology cycle. And that's why I like fundamental rights so much. Fundamental rights are, I mean, if you look at the European Convention of Human Rights, those are really short sentences, very simple sentences that capture ethical and moral and guidance developed over centuries. Like something like the in German, die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar. So human dignity is involved. There's so much in that, and with each new shift of technology, these rules still apply and still guide us and still help us. I think this is actually really cool if you manage to do such kind of laws. Also, something like the data protection law, which is a really old law. I mean, the first data protection directive was coined in the 90s, the European one. And for a long time, it has actually really survived and helped us to figure out how to deal with personal data online. And of course, there's always criticism. Some like it, some hate it. But the fundamental principles were applicable for a very long time. So good laws are not outdated with each new technology. But because the developments are so fast, and especially because the value chain has become so much more complex, and because it's so difficult to predict the risks, laws also have to find new ways to become more agile. And I think you could always compare it a bit to software. So nowadays, if you sell software, it's seldomly finished. It will develop, and it get patched, and new risks get developed and discovered, and then comes another patch. The same thing is true for the laws. And if you look like something at the AI Act, it is a law, but the real regulation will only happen now with the implementation acts, with standardization, with terms of use. And there you see much more flexibility. So laws are also developing new ways of being better able to deal with the insecurity and be more responsive and flexible.
A few years ago, I saw you give a keynote at the Recommender Systems Conference talking about regulating recommenders.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of ties to what we just said, but also to this human-centered approach. When we develop these services, whether it's recommenders or anything, we want to regulate them somehow to make sure that they deliver value to the users. How can we think about regulating in a human-centered fashion? So all of these AI services, whether it's, search, personalization, recommendation, are there any specific sort of undeniable truths or facts that we should think of?
Yeah, actually, we do a lot of research about that right now as well. We do have some rules now in the Digital Service Act on recommender systems, which honestly are the result of a lot of political compromises. And if you look at this rule, something you notice is that they still very much approach recommenders as a black box. And I think this black box metaphor has been very influential also in law and policy making. So what these rules do is essentially ask for transparency. So tell us what is in this box and how will it affect us. And then there's one provision where very large online platforms should give users the opportunity to choose for a non-personalized recommendation stream. I would be really interesting to hear from you if you think that this can work in practice. But what you very much see is we see these recommenders as a black box, and this box does not belong to us. This box belongs to the platforms, and they manage it, and we need to rely as a society that they tell us what is happening in there and somehow do the right thing. And I think we really need to get away from this black box metaphor. It is not helpful at all, because the kernel of recommender systems is the technology itself, the models, but then there are other elements that are also part of recommender system that very much influence what we see. So for example, the input data, the content that the recommender can choose from, the data of users that are used to optimize what we all see. If these are not diverse, if these are not curated in a sense with view to privacy, to diversity, to equality, then this will very much influence our recommendations. So the data, and then these systems function within a company, and this company decides who is working on these systems, who's hiring the people. They decide what we optimize the recommender systems for. So there are actually a lot of really important decisions made in the management that influence recommender systems. So what we argued in a recent report for the European Consumer Organization is that we need to see recommenders much more like a stack of different layers and business operations. And if you move from this black box that belongs to someone else to understanding that actually recommenders are part of a business model and consist of different layers in the organization, you also start seeing that the intervention points for regulation are very different. So, for example, on the level of data, I can ask how diverse is the content pool that you're drawing on? Is there any unlawful content in there? On the business level, if we talk about transparency, I'm not simply interested in the parameters of the recommender, but I'm interested what management thinks that system should be optimized for. I'm interested in what does management tell the development teams. When are they successful? When will they get paid or promoted? I think if we want to talk about human-centric AI, we really need to think more about the humans behind the AI, because in the end, I mean, they shape the technology.
I think this is a super interesting thing. Transparency, not only for the model, but for the entire organization or everything involved. That's a very interesting perspective. I haven't thought of that myself before, because usually, as a computer scientist, someone who works with machine learning, when someone says transparency of AI, I think of the model. But this was very useful. Thank you for that insight. So, as someone who's not from computing, how has your experience working with AI been, would you say? What are the most difficult things, or what are the most important things that technologists should be aware of when working in interdisciplinary teams with AI?
That's a big question. Let me start with something a bit easier, which is what should lawyers think about when they talk with technologists, because we very much often see then the instinct trying to be able to understand everything. So I think for lawyers, it is important to understand how much you need to understand to have meaningful interactions with computer scientists. How much do I need to be able to program myself? What are the principles that are relevant for my disciplines that I need to ask you questions about? And how deep does that go? And then the other way around, I think for technologies, and I see actually a lot of this already happening, the awareness that technology itself is only part of the story, and that technology is implemented in institutions, in human context, in legal context, in societal and value context. And for grasping that there is something beyond the algorithm, I think that is the first important step, because that will enable you to start thinking about what kind of questions should you ask people from another discipline. And it is really interesting. So we did quite a bit of research with media companies on diversity and recommenders. And it were often the people from R&D, the technologists, that would reach out to us and tell us, here's diversity. What does that actually mean? And it was really interesting that it was far more seldomly the editors that came in, because they had the gut feeling of diversity and what it might mean, and somehow would got it. So sometimes it is also really helpful when someone from a different disciplines questions some of the concepts or principles that you simply take for granted because you've been around these principles for such a long time.
Yeah. So the notions of fairness and diversity from a legal perspective, what are the things that are important to take care of when working with diversity and fairness of AI?
Diversity is a beautiful, cool, cruel, and complicated concept because it is so many things. I think what is crucial to unlocking any understanding of diversity is that diversity is not a goal in itself, but a goal to an end. So diversity can serve a lot of ends in society. It can help us to see other views. It can help us to become more tolerant. It can help us to test our own ideas. It can help people who are marginalized in a debate to find some voices that are like theirs. It can help recognition. And I think understanding that diversity can be many different things helps you to understand what to optimize for. And there's not this one golden good definition of diversity. And for example, very different media organizations have different needs and different contributions to making a media environment more diverse. So a financial magazine like the Financial Times will probably never reach full diversity in the sense of reflecting all ideas and opinions in a society like a public broadcaster should do. But it might give more diverse information on a particular topic. So it is a fluid concept and one that you should approach with humility instead of understanding, well, here's this one formula and that is diversity. Sometimes I think we need to accept that things are not easily pressed into a formula.
So I want to jump back to transparency again, because I agree with Alan. I had the same reaction. That's kind of a fresh and new, interesting perspective on that. I also, as a technologist, perhaps thinking transparency means we need to release the weights of a model or something like that. But here the perspective, well, no, we just need to know kind of what the organization, how the organization is governed and what their goals are and that sort of thing. But do you think, is that going to be easier? Is that easier than this technology-centric idea of transparency? We just need to leave the weights. We need to know the data, because that can be hard and it can be difficult to get an organization to release the data and the models because that's their USP perhaps. But is it easier to actually get them to tell them how do you decide who you hire and how did you optimize and what you optimize for? Because that could also be kind of a secret, right?
So first of all, I think this whole idea that transparency is easy or cheap or so is a complete fallacy. It's interesting to see that in regulation, if we have a new regulatory problem and we don't know how to approach it, the standard answer is we need more transparency. Because somehow transparency is one value that everybody kind of can agree on. We need more transparency. Making good transparency is not easy and is really expensive. And I think that is something we should realize. I realized that when I did research into transparency for the European consumers, and then I compared the terms of use with the way Apple and other companies try to explain their product and be transparent about the product, and how much more effort and design went into the product explanations than into the terms of use. So you really see different levels of transparency here. Is it easy to ask companies to divulge how they instruct their team or how their hiring policies is or what they optimize for? No. These are not business secrets. These are some of the most protected secrets. And sometimes I wonder where this whole regulatory debate has converged on models and data and weights, because maybe those are maybe even less sensitive to divulge than business information. But the point of diversity, transparency is not to be easy. The point of transparency is to create accountability, to create observability, to help society to understand what is happening and intervene when necessary. And while there can be very valid reasons to protect information through business secrets, some of these technologies, and especially in the hand of some particular companies, are simply so incredibly powerful and so influential on our lives and society that we've moved past business secrecies, that we really need to be more ambitious as a society and demand more information. And we also want transparency from our governments, our parliamentarians, whom they talk to, whom they are lobbied at, because they are governing the world. Some companies today are also governing our world. So I think we really should stack up our request for transparency.
When speaking of transparency in the term of the company as well, somehow we're getting away from the AI aspect of it, right? If we talk about the transparency of a company, this is no longer just for companies doing AI, right? This is for everyone in that case. Any company doing anything should be transparent about what they're doing. How do you split between transparency for the type of companies that work with AI versus transparency for companies that don't work with AI? Should there be a different reasoning around the corporate transparency for companies that have algorithmic models that steer something versus companies that don't use algorithms?
You're right. Influential companies need to be more transparent. That's for sure. We're talking about AI companies here. I think one thing that distinguishes AI companies like Google, OpenAI, a bit also in the policy debate, is that AI technology is something really complex that a lot of people simply do not understand. And these companies, and especially the technologies in these companies, they simply have an advantage here because they can always say, look, we don't know what our AI does. We don't even know. I mean, we just have to rely that at some point it will do something and then, act on that. And this algorithm is so incredibly complicated. Almost nobody understands. We are the only ones who can try to understand and explain it to you. So to some extent, this complexity is also used as a shield to not be transparent and reinforce the dominance of certain companies or actors in the policy debate. Look, you need us to be able to understand this, which creates incredible power asymmetries and information asymmetries. So I think something that really characterizes AI and the AI debate are huge information asymmetries, and partly because of the complexity of the technology and also the claims that we never know what it's doing. Again, I would be really curious to learn from you if that argument actually holds.
It makes me wonder what your view is on what often is talked as AI risk. What are the risks with AI? Are there any risks?
What are the risks with AI? I think there's some risks that are inherent in the technology itself, right? That it does something it shouldn't be doing, that it's mistaken, that it's hallucinating. So that is one level of risk. So the risk directly related to the technology. But there's a second level of risk, which is what humans do with the technology and for what reasons they use it. A large language model can be used to write Sinterklaas poems. It can also be used to create harmful disinformation or mass political advertising to manipulate votes. So part of the risk is the technology, but a big part of the risk is also what humans do with this technology. And this is something that is very difficult to grasp. And a lot of also the regulatory frameworks are very technology centric and very much optimized for this idea of human-centric AI and completely forget the humans behind the AI. And that part of the risks are actually what we do with it.
So how do you think it should be different? How should it be turned into more human-centric?
Let me again take the AI Act as an example, which is, according to the European Commission, one of the first comprehensive regulatory framework for AI worldwide. So it's a really ambitious proposal. A lot of thinking power has gone into it, and I think it puts some really interesting ideas out there. The overall approach is to focus especially on the developers of AI technology, and especially there on high-risk AI, so AI used in certain areas or AI used for certain areas, and ask them to make sure that their technology is safe and trustworthy and can be used in these areas by imposing data management obligations, transparency obligations, obligations to enable human oversight, and so far. And there the act almost stops. So what will happen then is these technologies are implemented by other actors and used in a certain way. They will be fine-tuned using other components. They will affect users who use the results in different ways. So there's a whole value chain behind the development that is only starting with the development, and also before the development, there's of course a whole value chain of data providers, content providers, labelers, human workers, and so far. I think if you really want to make AI human-centric, we need to broaden our perspectives, move from developers to look at the broader value chain and the different responsibilities along this value chain.
So do I understand you correctly then? You would characterize the AI Act as technology-centric and not human-centric?
There you go already, why these labels are so difficult. It is technology-centric in the sense that it tries to make technology human-centric. By doing so, it focuses on the technology and the developers of technologies, not the humans, the professional users engaging with it. There are very few obligations for professional users, like media organizations using AI. And one of the primary obligations is to follow the instructions of the developer, to do what the developer tells them. There's are very few provisions for end users and how they can, test and contest algorithms, whereas they are an important part of the feedback loop and helps us to understand where the risks are and where we need to improve. So it is a very narrow perspective of the value chain. And I really do think that the Act is very ambitious and can potentially do great things. But it is only the beginning of really human-centric AI.
So yourself, how close to technology are you? I mean, how much do you feel like you understand or know about the technology? I mean, you're using a lot of technology-centric words, debugging, for instance, and things like this, fine-tuning, etc. And it's impossible to kind of be in a field where technology is in the center without picking up that sort of stuff. But how much of the kind of nitty-gritty technical details are you aware of yourself?
Good question. I don't have a study in computer science. I do try to learn a lot from the computer scientists I'm working with, but I am humble enough to not pretend that I could tell you how an algorithm functions in details. Again, I think what my role is to understand the basic concepts and the basic functioning in order to be able to ask the questions that I need for, or also understand where I should be asking questions. And I think that is a bit of a trap for a lot of legal people, that we also work a lot with gut feeling and imagine how technologies are. And I think being able to understand when we should actually call in expertise, I think that is my level of technology. I hope my level of technology understanding. So knowing where I really need to call in an expert.
Sort of related to this topic, we've been talking about regulating AI. How would you say can AI be used for regulation?
Oh, yeah, I think actually in many ways. I mean, there are people who have tried to ask AI to write rules for them with questionable results. There are lawyers famously who invoked AI to solve the cases for them, which didn't go really well. But I think it is a really interesting technology to make sense of all the legal material we have. I mean, to some extent, you could say that we also amass a lot of data. We have judgments, with articles, we have provisions, and I think it can help us to critically reflect and research our own data, maybe get insights from that. It can help us to analyze the world and better understand risks or opportunities. So it can be a tool to really do research into understanding society, understanding societal problems. For example, very concretely, we just pitched a project proposal to use synthetic data and digital twins of a social network to be able to test regulatory ideas, intervention ideas. Because famously, it is very difficult to really understand what is happening on social media. Access is giving with gritted teeth and usually not complete. And we really need to understand how information moves and disinformation moves on social media. So the alternative is build a digital twin and try to see whether we could test certain ideas there and certain interventions, like a sandbox almost, a regulatory sandbox. So it could be used for that. Yeah, I think we also only start to explore how we can use AI in creative ways to make better laws. It's a really interesting question.
Right.
So could you explain what you refer to as a digital twin in that? Because I didn't understand if it was a digital twin of a person being the AI instead of a person, or if it is a copy of a social network, for instance.
It would be trying to simulate users on social networks and their behavior.
Okay.
And many of those, because scale again is a big factor here.
Of course. This has been an most interesting conversation, perhaps so far in the podcast. It's at least opened up and broadened my perspective a lot, which is very refreshing and fun and nice, and really the purpose of, I think, this podcast. So thank you a lot for that. Do you have any last words and final things you'd like to leave with us?
Thank you for the really good and difficult questions. And it was really fun talking to you, and yeah, to be continued at some place.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all your difficult answers, which has been excellent. Thank you so much, Natali.
Thank you.